The weekend following Lincoln's discharge was anything but relaxing. After Lincoln's cries to get the attention of the McBrides, they spent a half an hour trying to get him to calm down. It only stopped when Lincoln felt that he couldn't cry anymore, and his tear ducts were being dried out of his eyes while they still remained red and puffy. The early morning hours were no better. The chip-toothed haired boy remained fidgety and scared shitless, jumping even the smallest noise at the house, settling, or a squirrel running around the roof. Clyde managed to soothe him with the hyperventilating exercises via prop paper bag in order to further calm his nerves. Harold whipped up some of his famous McBride hot chocolate. It was made very well, with the whipped cream having two Hershey bars covered in extra chocolate shavings, and to top it off with a cherry. When Lincoln first grabbed it, his anxiety was clear, given how much coffee mug shook in his grip. Threatening to spill the treat, he burned his tongue a little just upon the first sip. But the subsequently drinks were enough to make him stop shaking like a leaf. When it came clear to Lad Lincoln couldn't go back to sleep anytime soon, the mere thought of rest sending chills down his spine. Clyde stayed up with Lincoln throughout the night to keep him occupied. The boys played games, a savvy comics mix they read, and with his dad's permission, watched some late-night reruns of ARG. Clyde became very dearly as the night dragged on, to which Lincoln grew concerned about. However, the African American just told him not to worry about it. By the time the sun's rays began peeking through the window, Clyde had passed out while watching TV, giving a sad gaze to his friend. Lincoln put their shared blanket over him before heading back to the guest room. Seeing the state of the bed had spruced back Lincoln before lying down, he could feel the pangs of sleep calling to him, but he just couldn't shut his brain down. He didn't want to think about whatever the night terrors were waiting for him when he wanted to do so. But he did feel guilty having Clyde stay up with them throughout the night. Not that it would appreciate the McBride's aid, the boy just didn't want to be dragged anyone else down his problems. Sunday was spent doing a few outside activities. Howard and Harold went out for their weekend walks, while Clyde and Lincoln tried to spend the day outdoors. Keyword tired, the two boys went out for a walk at the park, spotting a couple of boys passing around a football. Seeing this sport made Lincoln instantly think of a certain 13-year-old brunette. The boy quickly started to panic and hid behind a tree, scanning for Iward's sister. Clyde then was confused at this action, before it finally dawned on him as to why Lincoln was out of place. He quickly reassured him that pretty much Lynn wasn't anywhere near him. Although he wasn't too sure of himself, the nerdy child also gave Lincoln a paper bag just in case if he needed to vent. Clyde then suggested they hit the arcade at Gus, but then Lincoln remembered that Lori worked there, so that idea was quickly shut down. Clyde then suggested they try the arcade at the mall, and he grew regret the idea. As minutes into the facility, Lincoln became extremely nervous and fidgety all of the fashion stores. The African American slapped his forehead at forgetting that Lenny and Lola were into fashion, and one particular looked at something Lucy would enjoy. Then you also had the store, or that was for music, pet store, something Luna and Lana would love being around. Seeing Lincoln already breathing into his paper bag, Clyde dragged him back home before it got worse. The rest of the weekend was spent indoors, with Lincoln trying to catch up on his homework. Before the two got ready for school tomorrow, the boys went to bed, and they could think about was what would happen tomorrow. If Lincoln was nervous about the mere thought of his sisters being around, and due to the favorite activities, there was no telling how he would react the same building as them. Clyde gave a whiff of air. "Ah, don't you just love that morning spring air, Lincoln?" "Lincoln?" Clyde turned to his friend, who was lagging behind, starring the lines of the sidewalk. "Lincoln!" The boy shook his head and stared at Clyde. "Huh? You okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay." Lincoln smiled. Through Clyde could see that right through his facade. The boy with glasses could see a few bags under Lincoln's eyes. "You didn't sleep last night, did you?" His smile turned to a frown. No, I tried to, but it didn't last long. I could try closing my eyes, but actually not falling asleep." Lincoln covered his mouth as he yawned. My dad would have whipped up another hot chocolate for you if you wanted. It always helps me fall asleep. Thanks for the offer. I just don't want to go through another dream like that. What happened in it? You never spoke about it since Saturday. Lincoln hesitated to say anything. He bit his lower lip, and then tears began to crop up. That they were sharks, Clyde. That they were sharks. He gave a slow sniffle, rubbing his nose to prevent any snot from dripping out. Clyde blinked twice. I really don't know what to say about that, but if I know anything about sharks, it couldn't have been good. Lincoln gave a low nod. I fell right off the bed as they were about to... He paused, his lips quivering. I'm sorry, I can't finish that thought. As school came within visual range, Lincoln's slow pace grinded to a crawl. He knew that something there within that very building. 5 of his sisters were lurking around, and given that some of the students were still lingering around the front of the school, they were likely in the halls now. Clyde didn't notice Lincoln was far behind until he was halfway towards the front doors. Luckily, the nerdy child spent last night preparing to consider Lincoln to being inside the school. Just because he feared his sisters, that didn't mean he shouldn't let it interfere with his academic obligations. Lincoln, I know you're scared about being inside the school. I know there's like 5 of your sisters in that building. Clyde saw what Lincoln was now shaking his toes. But don't worry about it. They're all in different grades and different parts, so there's a low chance you'll ever see them, if at all. Do you trust me on this? Lincoln rubbed his cast arm. I'm not taking his eyes off the school. Clyde then put a hand on his friend's shoulder. Do you trust me? Lincoln then looked at Clyde directly in his eyes. He shifted his gaze to the ground for a moment before looking back, giving a small nod. Now, just follow me. Try not to think about them. Let's just focus on getting to class. Plus, you have other friends who are willing to help you, right? Lincoln gave another nod before Clyde led them into the building. Nosebleeder led Lincoln to his locker. While keeping an eye out for any of the girls, he asked if Lincoln needed help carrying his books. The boy refused. Despite being bedridden for a little more than a week, he gave a snow-haired boy plenty of time to learn on leverage of carrying capacity with one hand. After a quick stop at Clyde's locker, the two headed for their classes. Around that same time, Ronnie Ann was walking into class with a bored look on her face. Her punishment at home had passed a little while ago, and she was free to do as she pleased. So as long as she didn't get in trouble, in the words of the certain fat orange cat, she hated Mondays. The same old students, teachers talking your head off about nothing interesting, same old crappy popular girls gossiping about how pretty they were and their social status on Facebook, same old white-haired lame-o walking down with the lame-o number 2. Wait, backtrack for a moment. Ronnie Ann stopped at her pace to look behind her. She walked past Clyde like she usually did in the mornings, since their classes are at the opposite hallways, usually just barely noticing each other among the sea of people. But today, there was a person next to him that stood out to her. Among the large cloud of students, she managed to pick out the infamous afro-haired boy. She could barely see who was next to him amongst the other heads, but a white tuft of hair managed to stick out big enough for it to be noticed. Lincoln? She then muttered, and then it felt strange to see him there now. Since she last remembered, he wasn't due for a release for another week. Then again, it was about a week ago that she last visited him. Homework and being restricted to doing chores or to work offer punishment for breaking the dressers she kept at home. The Hispanic brunette didn't have any time to question whatever it was really Lincoln. Seeing that the hallways were growing empty, and she only could have a minute to be in her class, taking long, that where Clyde and the other boy went, she walked briskly towards Mass. Miss Johnson was reading over some course materials that she covered with her class today, occasionally glancing up to take count of how many students were in. Looking at her watch, she got up from her desk to be ready to close the door once the bell rang. Right as she got to the door, Clyde and Lincoln stepped in. "Hi, Miss Johnson," both said. "Hello, Clyde and Lincoln." Angie's eyes went wide in surprise
The white-haired boy waved while giving a sheepish smile. Well, glad to see you having your back, Lincoln. Mostly in better shape, the red-haired replied. Then, after taking note of Lincoln's arm cast, I hope you have gotten caught up with the lessons you missed. Then again, it's clear that you already did the outstanding homework I received. Angie chuckled. Lincoln looked at his teacher in confusion. He only had started to catch up yesterday, but somehow she already received his work. It didn't make much sense to him, but Lincoln decided not to question it. Taking his seat, several classmates were already drawn on his arm class.
How did you end up with that? Male Jordan asked. Where did you get in the car accident? Was another question from a small brunette girl. Nah, I heard he did something crazy and got it. That must have been wicked, the fat kid stated. A brown-haired African-American boy shook her head. Girl shook her head. I heard one of his sisters did it. That's dumb. Why would they do that? Jordan replied. I heard it's over an argument or something. Sounds weird, female Jordan answered. Lincoln felt a bit uncomfortable from all the questions, practically at the mention of his sister's breaking his arm, and semi-consciously rubbed his flailing limb. Children, if you want to sign Lincoln's cast, you can do it later. Angie paused as the tardy bell rang. If you don't mind, I have a few important subjects to go over since some of you didn't do so well on your last exam. A chorus groans erupted from the class. 2 hours into the school day, and Lincoln felt his mind becoming dulled out. His elbow was propped up on the desk, and head sitting on his hand as Angie gave the class a history lesson. His eyelids were halfway open. The boy was trying his best to keep himself awake, but there was love-hate relationship he had with the school right now. Under Clyde's promise, Lincoln hoped that school would help him distract him from his ever-growing problem. Yet that also meant dealing with 6 hours of being bored. It didn't also help that due to his lack of sleep, this lecture was doing a good job of making him want to catch sleep. Lincoln shook his head a few more times before trying to shake Sandman's call. This worked for only a few minutes. At the time he tried to open his eyelids up more, but he felt like bricks, only serving to make him fall lower and lower. Johnson's words started to become more muffled and incoherent as the boy's vision became more blear. But of course, unconsciously, Lincoln's elbow slipped off the desk, making his head fall to the open textbook, serving as a makeshift pillow. Lincoln's vision started to darken as sleep began to call him. Soon he couldn't hear anything other than the sounds of his own rhythmic breathing. After a few minutes of napping, Lincoln shook himself, hoping to have not been caught for sleeping. His surprise, the entire classroom was empty, the door itself being propped open. Not even the teacher was around, which was odd since he would have been wakened if that was the case. Lincoln heard the sounds of laughter outside. Getting up from his seat, the chip-toothed boy walked over to the window, spotting several people outside his class in for recess. Something out of place, though. If it was time for recess, why didn't anyone wake him up? Surely Miss Johnson would have reprehended him about sleeping in class, or probably maybe Clyde might tell her that he needed to rest since he hadn't slept well that night. Lincoln then heard the series of footsteps behind him, following the classroom door slamming shut. The boy jumped right at the fright of the noise, wheeling around to see who entered the room. No one was by the door, the only evidence that it was closed up and that the pulley for the blinds was moving left and right. Darting his head around, the boy couldn't see any other person. There was nothing hiding under the desks, and there certainly wasn't anyone sitting around Miss Johnson's desk. The snow-haired child shook nervously, a cold sweat running down his face. Lincoln bit his lip in an attempt to calm himself, but that was the moment of all the blinds in the classroom were shut. There was a little light that would flow between the crevices, like making the rest of the room appear nearly pitch black. What's going on? Is someone in there? Lincoln asked meekly. He was greeted with a childish hum. It sounded like a feminine, like a toddler was singing it. The tone sounded like it was suspiciously calling out to him, taunting the child to make him nice and scared. It echoed throughout the entire room, preventing Lincoln from pinpointing the source. The 11-year-old heart sank to his stomach. making him quake in his shoes. "Lincoln!" a voice rang out in the darkness. "It's time to play!" A second voice spoke. The twins. This isn't funny, guys," Lincoln spoke out in defense. "That's because it's supposed to be fun for us and not for you," an older, mature voice rang out, followed by a very recognizable laugh. Luann. 5 pairs of red eyes glowed dimly in the blackness of the room, making themselves known to the young boy. Lincoln only stared in absolute fear as their gazes stared directly to his soul. His mind was telling his body to run, to get out of there as quickly as possible. Yet as if his mind and body were in different wavelengths. His joints were locked up in fear, and his body doing nothing, even taking uneven, hitched breaths. It also seemed like Lincoln had no control of the moisture inside his body, and the sweat started to pool around his feet. Tears had started to leak from his eyes, even more embarrassingly. The boy had no control of his bladder, and he could feel the damp spot forming around his area, but Lincoln didn't care. "We're coming for you, Lincoln," Lynn's voice came next. "You can't escape us." Lucy's Monotasha's voice came out, making the boy ready to crap himself. No, stay away!" Lincoln cried out feebly, backing up towards the windows. His back hit the blinds, making them clatter at the sudden impact. "And no one's going to protect you." All 5 girls spoke in allusion, their hands reaching out towards him. Lincoln gripped his hair to the point that he'd rip it off if he removed his hand. Turning around, he had clawed at the blinds to try to pry them open, yet they were snapped shut like a steel trap. He banged on them and yelled out, hoping someone would hear his pleas for help. Sadly, it seemed to be drowned out by the laughter of his sisters. The small trickle of tears became more of a small stream, then he sank to the floor in despair. It was like being trapped in a cage with lions, and he was on the deer, one of their hands being grabbed hard on his shirt. Instinctively, he sat and swat at the hands at the feeble attempt to make them go away. All this was to make it easier to get the leverage on the boy. Luann's hand grabbed his arm and swing it stopped cold, followed by another of his sisters grabbing his shirt and legs. They pulled and screaming and crying Lincoln towards them, ready to unleash whatever hell they had in store for him. The snow-haired boy jolted awake in cold sweat, sitting right up on his seat in seconds. His textbook was stuck onto his face, the pages being damp from his drool. His sudden shout was loud enough to draw the attention of everyone in the class, who looked at him awkwardly, even Miss Johnson, who was writing down something on the whiteboard. He stopped his mid-sentence at the sudden interruption, so he was pretty much eerily quiet. The only thing he could hear was Lincoln's panic breathing. Greeting the other students and teachers with their own nervous glance, Lincoln sulked into his desk in shame. "Is something wrong, Lincoln?" Angie asked out of concern. "Can I use the bathroom?" Angie was a bit perplexed by the question. She was originally going to give him a small talk warning about sleeping in class, but maybe a trip to the bathroom may help keep him awake. "You may." Lincoln pulled off the book off his head and gingerly sat up from his seat. He walked over to the wall where the two hall passes hung, grabbing one before exiting out the room. The 11-year-old then walked through the halls to the nearest bathroom, keeping a wary eye over his shoulders in case any of his sisters tried to jump him. The boy reached his destination within a minute and quietly slipping inside the restroom. Cautiously, he checked every corner of the bathroom, including every stall. It was only when Lincoln realized that he was the only alone that he could finally allow himself to relax. While he thankfully hadn't peed himself in his sleep, there was still a small damp spot on his underwear. Giving a small sigh, he strolled to the closest urinal and let it loose. Once he finished, the boy washed his hands clean, then grabbed a handful of water to splash them on his face, wiped whatever dead skin remained around his eyes, clearing Lincoln's vision so he could get a better look at himself. What he saw was a reflection of a sad, scared, lonely boy. His hair was slightly messy, the bangs around his eyes were more prominent than ever. His eyes themselves were slightly red, likely from taking a short nap, with the veins themselves throbbing slightly and calling to his attention. He didn't notice it at first, but looking up at his hair, the white turkey feathers were drooping a little. Geez, Lincoln put his hand to his head. I look like a mess. No wonder everyone looked at me weird. Turning his head to sideways to get a full scope, the boy figured he might as well try to make himself more presentable. Putting his hand under the running faucet, Lincoln shook the excess water, started fixing his hair, combing and matting the follicles. He even tried putting his hair tough and rubbed it a bit until it was standing up on its own again. When he was finished, his hair looked like it usually was due. Looking at his eyes again, Lincoln grimaced of how little pathetic they looked. Maybe I should have tried to get some more sleep at the McBride's this morning. He squinted a little. His eyes were slightly irritated by this, but the boy figured a little cleaning would make them better again. Wetting his hands to try and wipe his face again, Lincoln stopped when he heard a sudden thumping start to echo in the room. The 11-year-old wheeled his head out frantically to find the source of the noise, but he couldn't figure it out what it was scared state. He pinched his arm to try and make sure that this wasn't another dream, and for better or for worse, the pain erupted from his shoulder told him it wasn't. The white-haired child gave a panicked scream before taking the shelter in one of the bathroom stalls. His breathing was made, his heart was pounding his chest as if it was about to burst through any moment. Lincoln reached into his pocket for a paper bag to use, only to find that he had none. His eyes then searched around the stall frantically for anything that it was about to burst through at any moment. He could use the help of calm before they settled in the toilet paper. But of course, he checked his pocket, but he searched around the stall frantically. He ran his fingers through quickly, only to be discouraged and find it empty. Looking at his shirt, Lincoln pulled it up to his mouth and started breathing deeply into it. Soon his breath became slower and more even, the boy curling up on the seat as he started fearfully at the stall door. In the girls' bathroom in the opposite side of the boys', Lola was humming to herself as she washed her hands. Normally she would have strayed far from her class at Tinkle, but the bathroom closest to her classroom, it had very dirty toilets. She'd be damned if she squatted on the P-written seat. A tune she was humming primarily means to calm herself. Apparently, since she wasn't going to be in the pageant game for a while, Lindsay had been ranking in the competition. The bratty redhead would lord this over Lola, whatever she got, making the blonde want to punch her pretty little teeth out. She continued to hum as she was about ready to leave the restroom, only stopped when she heard a familiar shriek coming from the other side of the wall. Was that Lincoln? Lola questioned. Stepping out into the hall, she put her ear up to the boy's door, and on how quiet it was, she picked up the small sobs from her dear brother. The blonde covered her mouth with both her hands. No doubt that they would probably have heard her singing. With scared pants off him, looking around, Lola made a beeline back to her classroom, catching the attention of a hall monitor. "Hey, no running in the halls!" a tomboyish voice let out. Lola stopped to look at her twin sister. "No running in the halls, Lola." "Lana," the girly twin said in a hushed tone, glancing back at the restrooms. "Now it isn't time for your hall monitor shit. He's in there." "He?" Lana asked, lifting her shades. Her eyes went wide at what Lola might be talking about. "You mean?" "Yes, now get out of here before..." Lola stopped when both girls heard the door being open. Looking back, though, they saw the bathroom door was being pulled open from the inside. Screaming internally, the girls both scrambled to make themselves scarce. Lana tried the lockers, hoping someone was dumb enough to leave one open. Lola looked around frantically for a hiding place, and then she tried the janitor's closet, but it was locked. She couldn't hide behind the fountain because her hair would stick out, and she would try out the lockers like Lana, but she could already see Lincoln beginning to poke his head out of the door. Lola then spotted a tall trash can. Biting her hand, she took a quick glance at Lana, who found an open locker and crawled inside. The former princess looked between the locker and the trash can, stomping in place anxiously. She couldn't run that fast to Lana without being spotted, and like a fountain, she would surely be noticed by Lincoln and put the L in the loud. The blonde clenched her fists,
seeing that there was no other option. "Dang you, Lana!" Lola muttered, before running up to the trash can and jumping inside of it. She landed face first into some old food that had been tossed in. The girl righted herself inside the trash can, fighting the urge to gag. She kept her mouth covered with her hands, just in case she let out one slip. Being surrounded by discarded gum, papers, and even broken tools, it was already draining the young girl's will not to screech out in disgust. Lola held her breath as she heard some hurried footsteps rush past her hind spot and continued down the hall. The blonde only dared to peek out when she no longer heard the footsteps. Glancing around, Lola sighed intentionally, seeing that Lincoln was gone. Unfortunately, she leaned too much in the trash can's side, forcing it to tip over. Lana poked her head out to see what made the noise. Nothing the lack of Lincoln's presence, but her eyes finally set up for the trash-covered Lola, who looked about ready to scream bloody murder. Not wanting to cause a scene in the hallway, Lana dragged her younger twin to the bathroom. She locked the door shut just in time to witness Lola, giving a scream so loud that her shades in the bathroom mirror had cracked. "Geez, Lola, any louder and I think I would have lost my hearing," Lana whined as she stuck a finger in left ear. "I'm covered in filth, and there's gum in my beautiful hair!" "Ah!" Lola yelled out. "Aw, come on, it's not that bad." "That's because you're always covered in mud." Lola looked at her broken reflection in the mirror. "I can't walk out like this. I'm hideous." The girlie's twin became glassy as tears started to form. "The girls in my class will make fun of me forever." "Not if I can help," Lana protested, reaching around her utility belt. Thankfully, Lynn Sr. allowed her to keep her tools in hand and rest on two circular handles, which he pulled on, revealing a pair of scissors. "Now, hold still." Lola looked at the object in her sister's hands nervously. She gripped her hair protectively, backing away. No, Lana, not my hair. Unless you want me to tear that gum off, I'll have to cut it. And if I don't want to chase you around in these, 'cause you'll know you aren't allowed to run with scissors." Lola bit her lip in protest, gazing at the reflection, giving a heavy sigh as she let go of her hair. "Fine, just be gentle." Lana smirked. "Oh, I'll be gentle." This didn't calm Lola's nerves one bit as her twin approached. When lunch periods began to roll around, the hallways once again became alive with activity. Students from all grades came in and did their daily fill of whatever happened to be on the menu, although some of the smarter ones elected not to eat the cafeteria food due to how stale it tasted. For Lynn Jr., if Ronnie Ann had the same lunch period as her, then it would be quite possible that this was also his lunch period. The brunette didn't have to worry much about trying to avoid Lincoln, as the two grades above her gave her a little bit of leeway. She would hardly have seen him during the week, if not at all. The only times we would potentially run into each other would be at the start of school, lunch, and when the day was over. Lynn and the rest of her sisters made sure to avoid the first hurdle when arriving to school earlier than usual. For lunch, the 13-year-old opted to eat outside instead of in the reheated food in the cafeteria. Lynn was instead eating a sandwich that she made that morning. The Jacques had to admit that it was such a nice eating outside for a change. It was warm, 72 degrees, with a slight breeze flowing. The birds were singing, and the tree that she sat under provided a decent amount of shade. Lynn then took a bite of her meatball sandwich, gazing at the students at the window. She knew that somewhere in that room Lincoln was probably sitting with his friends. Sadly, Junior couldn't stay in the same way for her. Polly still refused to talk to her, and she would likely have told a few of her derby teammates about what she had done. Said teammates, now former friends, said a few not so pleasant words to her at one another. Lynn still catches a few glares from them every now and they weren't the only people she caught the attention of. Over the past 2 weeks, Lynn had been approached by some people from 4 other sports that she played. She thought they might have caught wind of what she had done to her brother. But instead, the question was always, will you be coming back anytime soon? The next season starting up again. In response, Lynn always responded with a curt no. She didn't follow up with any words after that.
As Lynn herself, she wasn't sure if she'll partake in sports again. Taking another empty bite of her sandwich, her ears perked when the sound of feet stepping on grass in her ears. Looking to her left, she was surprised to see one of her Derby teammates with her own bagged lunch. Didn't think you'd be the type to eat outside. What are you doing out here, Margot? Lynn asked. I could ask you the same thing, the large-nosed female replied, taking a seat next to Lynn. I have my own reasons for being out here. It's about your brother, isn't it? Margot stated in an obvious tone. So Polly did speak. Yeah, she did. Margot opened up her bag, revealing a turkey sandwich. I didn't really believe it at first, but seeing as you didn't try to deny it, well... Lynn stared at Margot. Well, what? Are you going to chew me out for the fact I beat up my own brother? Margot shook her head. I think you already did that to yourself, but I really have to ask, Lynn. Why? Lynn didn't respond for a few moments. Polly already told you. It was due to me not controlling my anger, and she was right. She looked up at the sky. Normally I just rough play a lot with Lincoln, but after what happened that weekend, it was all because me and my 8 older sisters got the standoff at the high noon. But before we ended up turning our sights on him, Jean gave us a low snort. It's funny how we try to keep him out of our arguments, only to end up sweeping onto him anyways. Shows how smart we are. Lynn then looked over at the window, spotting a certain head full of white hair. He's going to be healing from that whole ordeal for a while. Well, yeah, 'cause he's got a broken arm, but why aren't you trying to make peace with him? That's the problem, Margot. The Jacques looked back at the brunette. I'm not concerned about Lincoln's broken arm. Well, I am. It's just that I'm concerned about the most, but that being he took it changed him, Margot, in one of the worst ways imaginable. Margot gave a questionable look. Like what? Is he going to become cold-hearted bully or a vengeful person? No, I don't think Lincoln has a mean bone like him. Especially since he freaks out whenever me or any of my sisters get near him, or if he sees us. For his own safety, I'm just gonna be like Lucy and stick to the shadows. I thought I wouldn't be surprised if he's cautious about being in school again. Margot then shifted her eyes a bit, not quite understanding this. Oh, so he's just a little scared? That doesn't mean you gotta be a coward about it. Lynn furrowed her brows, already started heating at the other girl. Don't you get it, Margot? Lincoln is getting fucking nightmares about me, okay? And my sisters. Doing the hell knows what. Don't you think that if I want to make things up with Lincoln, I would have done it already? She paused and took a deep breath. I tried, okay? I fucking tried to tell him how sorry I was the day I went after this whole shitstorm started. And guess what happened? He popped me in the face with his own food tray, and I got too close to him. The 13-year-old breathed a few deep breaths, staring at the ground. Ronnie Ann may have kicked my ass that day, but it didn't hurt as much as getting smacked by Lincoln, and he didn't hit me out of anger. It was straight up fear. Margot stayed silent. Her lips parted as if she was about to say something, but no word came out. Biting her lower lip, she tried to formulate some sort of response. That's also another thing I didn't understand. How did someone like you lose to Ronnie Ann? She's a street punk with an attitude. Well, someone needed to know to throw down on me for breaking my brother's arm. Lynn then looked down at her own half-eaten sandwich. I would have asked Polly to do it, but Ronnie Ann beat her to the punch. She looked at Margot. I'm kind of surprised the whole school doesn't even know about it yet. Why would they? Don't know. Just seems like it would just sprout out on social media. I mean, mine and Ronnie Ann's fight got like 5K views on iTube. Well, Marcy was just thinking of telling the others in a tweet, but I managed to talk her out of it. Lynn looked at Margot in surprise. What? Why? I thought you all hated me. Margot shook her head. Hate is a strong word, Lynn. I mean, I'm disappointed in you, but to be honest, I don't see you as something you wouldn't do. To find out you actually did it, that's why I felt that I couldn't speak with you for a while. It just felt so awkward. But seeing that you're still beating yourself up for it on your bro, what means is you at least care. I mean, it's not like any of us have personal beef with you that would make us want to permanently ruin your reputation or anything. I came out to you as a friend. Even though some of the other girls refuse to believe you exist, they don't know you like I do. Lynn scoffed at the notion. I want to call bullshit on that, because I know that some of you weren't exactly fond of my rituals, she quoted with her fingers. Margot rolled her eyes. Okay, yes, I'm not happy with waiting to pee or poop after the game, but you didn't hear me complain too much. All friends get mad at each other. FYI, what are you supposed to do how to fix your problem? Lynn opened her mouth to form a rebuttal, but closed it as no words came out. She stared at the ground heatedly and thought. It didn't really feel like Margot was a friend, considering that she avoided talking to the sports fanatic for almost 2 weeks. Lynn could have just told her to go away and piss off, to leave her to think about what her own pitfalls. But if Margot came with all the way out here now, she'd probably want to form some sort of line of communication, for now at least. At this point, the really thing I want is my older brother back. I can give less of a shit about sports, but for now, I'm benched, and he's not much I can do to help Lincoln other than keeping out of his sight. Margot flared her nostrils at the moment. Well, did you try talking to him by the phone? He's still out of sight, but yet plus he can control whenever he wants to talk or not. Lynn chewed on her sandwich. That's something we're thinking about. Her voice came out muffled. Margot gave a small snort. Anyone teach you not to talk with your mouth full? Inside the cafeteria, Ronnie Ann scanned the tables for any sign of Clyde and Lincoln. Her hands in the tray was a pizza, cornbread with green beans. She had made a mental note not to eat the beans, as her stomach didn't quite agree with them last time. The tomboy wasn't sure what they put in the crap, but she was going to spend the next 20 minutes on the toilet again. Her head had moved left and right slowly, her eyes scanning the individual's table like a bird watching prey. As she scanned the tables on the next to the windows, she finally spotted the targets: an African American with glasses and an afro, small, tall, freckled redhead with curly hair, somewhat of a short, sophistical farm boy, and a shorter redhead with spiky hair and glasses, and finally a Snow White-headed male with a black arm cast around him. Giving a small breath, the black-haired girl strolled her way over to them. So, what was it like being in the hospital? Zach asked. Does that cast come in different colors? Rusty came in next. Did it stink having to be stuck in bed for a while? Liam butted in. Well, at least he'd had the chance not to be at school. Am I right? The tall red-haired joked. Was all Lincoln's reply to their questions. The boy kept absently picking at his food, occasionally taking a bite while his stomach demanded that it needed to be filled. Okay, play 20 questions didn't work. Seriously, Lincoln, why are you so down in the dumps today? I thought you'd be happy out in the... Rusty cringed. Hospital. I'm just tired, Lincoln stated slowly. It was a liable excuse, seeing that he still carried a few bags under his eyes. Well, that's the part of it, Clyde stated. Yeah, you were pretty jumpy when you came back from the restroom. Liam then looked around to make sure that no one was eavesdropping. You didn't happen to see a ghost, did ya? Ooh, if there was a ghost, we would try to get our ghost hunting gear, Rusty exclaimed. Well, to be honest, though, throughout the school being written as an evil spectator. Aw, come on, Rusty. You know that ghosts live in the school is just a myth, Zach replied. He's right, you know, a feminine voice spoke. The boys turned their heads, shriveled over their seats to see Ronnie Ann. Make some room. Liam shrugged before sliding himself and his tray to the left, opening a spot next to Lincoln. She gave Lincoln a couple of soft dabs on the back, which surprisingly made him feel a small form of smile within a mere seconds. So, what is with you guys? The Hispanic girl asked, taking a small bite of her pizza. Aside from the ghosts, we're still trying to figure out why Lincoln's feeling blue, the farm boy answered. I still think it's from that arm cast, Zach spoke out as he chewed his food. Rusty furrowed his brow. Or it might be due to what his no girl good sisters did. They're the reason that he has a cast. Upon hearing the word sisters, Lincoln visibly flinched. He gripped the plastic fork tightened a bit, the utensil bending as it scraped the tray at the random angles due to Lincoln's shaking hand. The chip-toothed boy didn't even realize he was fidgeting until Clyde put on a smile and hand on his shoulder. And almost every time they're mentioned, he gets antsy, Rusty said. Clyde then gave an annoying glance at his friend. I told you mentioning them a lot isn't helping. Sorry. Rania was confused, but unnerved by that display. Oh, okay. Clyde, what is this all about? Lamo looks like someone is about out for him. Why would he think that? Maybe it's just paranoid from not counting sheep, Liam stated. Clyde looked at Lincoln, who didn't appear to be in any good mood to give an answer. His best friend was just whittled with the fork in his hands to keep himself occupied. The nerdy child just fidgeted that he might as well tell them the truth since they were all together. Plus, the noise at the lunchroom would drown out their conversation. I don't know how to tell you guys this, but here's what's going on. Lincoln is tired from not getting any sleep. That's true, but it's mainly because he's been suffering nightmares. Okay, so what's so bad about that? Ronnie Ann asked. Those nightmares are about his sister's doing. Clyde bit his lips a bit, seeing Lincoln flinched again. I'll just say his nightmares never ended on a happy note, and because of that, Lincoln's developed a radioactive fear of all of them, except Lily.